remind you all that to please sign in if you haven't done so. We'll check at the end to make sure that we've got everybody, but just so you're aware that we're trying to capture who's at the meeting with your name, your agency, your position, your email, and your phone number. During the presentation, I've got everybody muted right now. We'll give you the ability to unmute at the end. But if you do have a question during the presentation, you can enter it into the chat. We'll also have an opportunity at the end. So if you want to hold your questions, that's fine. But just feel free to type them in the chat, and just make sure if you do type a question and you hit the little arrow to paste it. It's sort of like a return, but if you don't hit that, we can't see it. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Hopefully everybody's here for the community coordination meeting for Merrimack Watershed, specifically Rockingham County. I'm Greg Stewart with the U.S. Geological Survey, and I'm one of the project managers, and I'm going to be presenting to you today, going through the CCO meeting. And starting off, to give you kind of an overview of the agenda of what we're going to talk about, we're going to cover kind of the project timeline as a large-scale flood hazard analysis recap, the flood risk products, the hazard mitigation and flood insurance, and then post-preliminary process, sort of like the next steps, what needs to happen next, just so you're kind of understanding the process. So the community involvement for a risk map project, there's 4 meetings. So, and these have been spaced out quite a bit because we did the Merrimack Watershed, which spans a pretty large area. There's been multiple meetings. This one is just just Rockingham County. So I'm going to go through a couple of different maps to show you kind of the different areas, but just so you kind of understand, the discovery meeting was way back in 2015. We did work maps in 2019, and now we're doing the CCO meeting in 2023. And the final meeting will be the open house meeting, and I'll explain kind of roughly where that is in the timeline a little bit later. So the community involvement, so again, this was the CCO meeting for the Massachusetts counties, and then we did Hillsborough and Merrimack counties in New Hampshire in December of 22, and you're the last piece of the Merrimack Watershed in Rockingham County. So looking at the timeline of a whole, you've got the discovery meeting. We've got, we did our engineering analysis, we did our surveying, we did our new hydraulic models, we did our mapping. And then we presented everybody work maps, and then we took those work maps and we put them through FEMA's quality review process, made some updates and changes, and now we're at the CCO meeting. And then finishing that out, we're going to be doing the appeal period and LFD, the letter final determination, and then the open house meeting, and then it'll be adoption. So you kind of, and I'll go through a little bit more detail on those steps, but just kind of a quick snapshot of the timeline. So Merrimack Watershed as a whole covers 8 different counties in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. There's 110 towns and cities, a little over almost 4,000 total stream miles, and about 1.5 million residents. So it's a pretty large area. For this CCO meeting, we're just covering Rockingham County in New Hampshire within the Merrimack Watershed. So it's not the entire Rockingham County, it's just the Merrimack Watershed piece of Rockingham County. So if you're on that border of the watershed, only part of your maps are going to be updated. So 20 different communities the watershed touches, they're all listed there, so you kind of have a sense for what they are. These are some of the 3 of the 5 reaches that we did in detail. The only one that's going to impact Rockingham on this list is Beaverbrook. So that's a big chunk of a number of your communities touch Beaverbrook. And then again, a couple more reaches, Spigot River, that will touch some of you as well. So those are new detailed studies that were done where we did the surveying, we did the hydrology and hydraulics, we did brand new mapping for those. So those will have new BFEs, new base flood elevations. So in Rockingham County, there's 73 panels. The entire panel was remapped. What that means is if the watershed just clipped a corner of the panel and there was a floodplain on it, we're going to redo the entire panel. So that entire panel is going to be redrawn using the new LiDAR topography data, so using that new base level information. So obviously we would update anything that had a new base flood elevation, but this is going to be just making sure you understand that the entire panel was brought up to the same datum standards and redrawn. So to give you kind of a quick shape file, so you'll see the panels that are slashed out were not included. So this is again the watershed boundary. So the panels that weren't slashed out, so if the panel goes into the other watershed, we would still update this portion. And the reason that sometimes a shaded area comes this way is there's no mapped floodplains in this area. So there was no approximate models that touch this. So that panel was not updated. So that'll be updated on a previous, on an impending study that's being conducted right now that may happen in the very near future for you. So there's three different types of changes that happen to your floodplains. The first is the delineated study. So that's again going to be Spigot River and Beaver Brook. For those of you that have communities that touch those reaches, those will have the new surveying, new hydrology and hydraulics, new topography will be defining those. They'll have new, and we incorporated obviously any new bridges, culverts, dams, and any channel changes that happen to the stream. So brand new surveying, brand new hydraulic model, brand new BFEs. So they may be similar to the old BFEs, they might be slightly different. Depending on what the new information and new models resulted in. So redelineation. So that's a detailed study where there was a base flood elevation. So there were cross sections. There is a previous or older hydraulic model that existed for that, and they have published base flood elevations. We're not going to make any changes to the base flood elevation. The only change there is to the floodplains based on the topography. So again, we're using the LiDAR data underneath to adjust the floodplains to the appropriate elevations, but the elevation themselves, the base flood elevation, is not changing. Zone A's don't have BFEs, so those are approximate models that don't have BFEs on the map. Those have brand new models underneath. They're drawn on new topography and placed on the new aerial imagery. So all of your Zone A's will be replaced and updated. Some of them may be very similar. We do look at the historic ones for shape and size and try to make sure to capture them if they make hydraulic sense and the model makes sense to include them. But just so you know, those are all going to be new. So flood risk products. So flood risk products, these are what's called your regulatory products. So these are the pieces that regulate the floodplain itself, the flood insurance rate maps. That's the thing we lean on the most. We talk about the most is the maps themselves. But just so you also know that there's a flood insurance report that sits under that explains in text form and in tables a lot of the information that's presented on the maps. Things like what flows were used, what end values were used. There's floodway data tables, which actually presents the numbers. There's flood profiles. All of that information is sitting in those flood insurance reports. And then there's a flood insurance rate database where all of that GIS data is all coded in category. All of the data is put together and compiled in this database so that you can access it. All of this data, all of this information is available right now on the FEMA Map Service Center. There was a short blip we had where the Map Service Center was struggling, having trouble getting the data up. So we posted it on the short term for our SharePoint site. That data is still there, but that's not really where we want you to go. We really want you to go to the FEMA Map Service Center. So anytime you can go there, please do. That's where you want to be pulling the data from. And then there are non-regulatory products. I'm going to go through these with some pictures, so I'll just kind of skip this slide for now and kind of go through the pictures, but just making sure you're clear that you understand these are non-regulatory products, which means you're not going to be talking to, explaining to people whether they're in or out of the floodplain. These aren't really applicable if they're doing a loam C or trying to get out of the floodplain. These are non-regulatory products. They're used to help inform you, give you information about the floodplain, and about how that works, not a regulatory product. And I'll explain what that means as I show you the different products. So the changes since the last flood insurance rate map is a pretty straightforward product, with the idea being that highlighted areas are shown as like green is coming out of the floodplain. So that area is no longer flooded. The red is new floodplain. So that's an area that's now been added to the floodplain. And these will exist all throughout the map in different ways, shapes, or forms. But just so you understand that these changes are going to be here. The big striped red or green are going to be more to do with changes to the floodway. So, and the floodway is a different regulatory entity, not the floodplain itself. So if the area is shown in gray, you'll see that there's no change to the floodplain. So that means that the floodplain has stayed the same for this entire area. Hopefully you can see kind of where my cursor's moving. But again, it's expanded over here where it's slightly larger. It's made slightly smaller over here. So the green area is the old floodplain that no longer is in. So anything in those areas are no longer in the floodplain. So again, hopefully that makes sense. And the map's pretty self-explanatory, but just kind of highlighting so you can see those different products. And those are GIS products as well. So you can actually change the colors or add or delete layers if you want. Flood depth grids. So these are intended to kind of give you an understanding of what the water depth might be. So this may be important for your planners if you're depending on what you're using for parks, things like that. These could be useful to understand kind of where the water is fairly shallow versus, red, which is very deep. A percent annual chance grid. So this is sort of showing you all of the floodplains at the same time. So these are a little bit strange to look at first, but just kind of understanding, the red area, it's going to flood. You have a 10% chance in any given year of flooding. That could be referred to as the 10-year flood. But then you have a 4%, 1%, and 0.2%, which again would be the 500-year if you're doing annual exceedance probabilities versus the actual recurrence interval, which would be 0.2%. And then you have a percent chance grid that's built on the 30-year. The idea kind of like is that's a typical residential mortgage where you'd say, what is your probability of flooding during the next 30 years? So if you were getting a mortgage, what is the likelihood you'd flood? Just so you better understand and the community, so that you better understand, what areas are going to be more prone to flooding than other areas. So to help again with the planning and understanding of what's in the floodplain. The hazardous analysis, this is the state of New Hampshire would have had to do the statewide process. But the hazardous analysis is something that the town themselves or the city can actually dig into and add additional information. It gives you things like, what the damages might be if you have a certain type of flood. Uses a lot of census data. So if you don't add your own data, it's going to be kind of a coarse scale. It's tough for a town maybe to get really, really detailed information, but the town themselves could put that information if they want to use that tool. It's used on a larger scale most of the time, but it definitely can be used at a town scale, but you would just have to input your own information. So there's a number of different maps that are generated. And there's calculations and numbers that are produced, again, from census data on housing values and damages, etc. So there's a lot of useful information in there for planning. Flood hazard mitigation and flood insurance. So just making sure you understand that there's a lot of mitigation action categories. There's structural, non-structural projects, there's planning, there's education and outreach, there's natural resource protection. So this is just trying to take mitigation and break it down a little bit. Mitigation is kind of a really, really big, broad topic. So trying to put it into different categories so that you better understand what category it is, because that actually drives when you look at a lot of the grant opportunities, that some of them are designed for those different hazard mitigation programs. So these are all FEMA's programs. These probably aren't all of them. These are just some of the programs, but you have the hazard mitigation grant program for post-disaster grants, and then you have the pre-disaster mitigation, and the and again you have the flood mitigation assistance. These programs are always subject to congressional appropriations, what funding they have available. You have to have a mitigation plan. There's usually, I think there's almost always some kind of a local state cost share. FEMA puts in a bunch of the money, but the state or the local entity has to put in a little bit of the money. So, and the state really is heavily involved in the hazard mitigation process. So you have a state hazard mitigation officer. They're going to be the right person to be in touch with if your town's looking for one of these grants. These grants all carry the same goal, which is reducing the risk to life and property. There's only so much money to go around. Not everybody is going to win some of these grants, but I've seen many cases where these have really helped out towns, been able to get a big chunk of FEMA funding to help, solve some of their flood problems or flood risk areas. FEMA is not the only one that offers grant programs, just so you're aware. There are grant programs from the EPA, the Army Corps of Engineers, BLM, which isn't as prevalent out here, but USDA, NOAA, they have their own very specific programs that are for certain categories. But there are a lot of other programs out there besides FEMA that you can get grants from. The community rating system. This is a FEMA program where it's intended to help the people that live in your community that have flood insurance. So what this does is there needs to be a plan. There's a lot of tools. I'm not going to do a very good job explaining this program, but it's a really good program to help the town, help the people that live in your town lowering their flood insurance. And what it does is it says if you have a plan, so you may say, well, okay, I'm only going to allow people to build with like a 1 foot or 2 foot freeboard in the town. So the town is putting rules in place and putting a plan in place to try to keep people from building in the floodplain. When you put those policies and practices in place, FEMA gives you these credits which apply to lowering lowering the flood insurance rate of the people that live in your town by doing these different planning things. So Katie Rand is the right person to contact at FEMA to really help understand this program. But there's ways you can get, I think it goes all the way to like 45%, but it's pretty substantial to get to 45%. But there's some fairly easy things your towns can do to get to 5 or 10%. Which can be substantial for people on fixed income, things like that, to be able to lower their flood insurance rates. So just so you're kind of aware of these programs. So now we're going to move into the post-preliminary processing phase of the project. So you kind of understand, where we're going now. So we've presented these maps. So your job is to review these preliminary maps, make any corrections and comments and appeals where appropriate. And I'm going to go through what the difference between a comment and an appeal. Conduct outreach to the citizens affected. We're FEMA and us as the project chief, we're not going to be contacting those people that are in or out of the floodplain. That's going to be anything you can do to help to get the information out to those citizens is really what we're looking for. And your last task is really going to be to adopt the new floodplain ordinance to meet the National Flood Insurance Program standards. So that's something your state's going to have a template, and you would work with them to grab that template and adopt it. So just thinking about this sort of from a step-by-step standpoint. So right now we're in the CCO meeting. So the next phase is a publication in the Federal Register announcement. So that takes some time. We have to put some paperwork together. We go and submit this to the Federal Register, and it's a posting on a federal site that basically says that, hey, you have new floodplains, making sure that everybody knows that they're out there. Then we do newspaper publications. We do 2 separate publications 7 days apart. To try again to just make sure to let people know that the new maps are available. At the end of that second publication, there's a 90-day appeal period. So on those newspaper publications, they will say the start date of the appeal period is X. So it'll give it an actual date. We don't set that until we have the Federal Register posting, because that sometimes can take a little bit of time. So once the Federal Register is posted, then we set the date and we put in the newspaper notifications to tell people when the appeal period starts. So there's 90 days from the beginning to the end, calendar days, that they have available to file a comment or an appeal. And at the end of that time, at the end of the 90 days, all the comments and appeals are done. Then we're working towards, there's a final review by FEMA of all the products and information. And at the end of that, we're going to be setting this letter of final determination. So the LFD has been set and notifying you that you have 6 months to adopt that, again, to include that new ordinance, and to adopt the maps. So that's kind of the idea behind that, is there's 6 months from the LFD to the actual adoption to make those maps effective. In the middle of that time period, so between LFD and your adoption, usually like 3-4 months in, FEMA will conduct an open house meeting. The open house meeting is a meeting where it's going to be the general public is invited in. There'll be insurance specialists there. There'll be hazard mitigation planners. There'll be us as the technical representative. We'll have a bunch of different representatives there, with the process of a homeowner coming in and say, I live at 38 Maple Street. And there'll be somebody there, a technical assistance person, that will help you look at the maps and see if you're in or out of the floodplain. And if you're in the floodplain, what does that mean? FEMA will have insurance specialists there and be able to explain the insurance process and how about going about to getting insurance. If they've already got insurance, what their options might be, how best to, appropriately set their insurance for their specific circumstances. So again, those are really good meetings for the public. That's kind of the public input portion, I guess you could say. Even though the appeal period is open to the public, that's not exactly the same as the open house. The open house is just meant for anybody in the public that wants to know more about if their particular house is in or not. The appeal period is for technical changes to the map. So those aren't the same thing. Also, to get your preliminary data, you can go through the link that's shown, the preliminary data search tool. So I just opened this morning. You just put in, I'm going to New Hampshire, going to Rockingham County, and boom, all the products are there. So again, you'll have access to all of this presentation. You'll have access to this link, but you also could search, for, I think I did FEMA preliminary data search tool or something along those. I typed these 4 words, but I think I typed FEMA preliminary data search tool, and it was like, I think, the second link on Google. So that's there too. And the Map Service Center is really the repository for everything. So just emphasizing the Map Service Center. And if you do Google FEMA flood maps, it's right there. It's always, and this is the link, it's just, Map Service Center, msc.fema.gov. It's pretty straightforward, easy. You just zoom into your town. Though the one thing people sometimes get stuck with is it's going to show your current maps, not your prelim maps. So you have to go up to a little button that says show all products, click that, and then you get access to the preliminary maps. So if you don't know that piece of it, you can kind of be like, hey, I'm seeing a flood map, and that's your effective map. That's the map that's effective today, right now. The preliminary maps aren't available today. And I've got the web page up. If you want a demo, just let me know and we can do that at the end. Appeals. So an appeal is a formal objection to the maps. So it used to be you could only appeal BFEs, and but now you can actually appeal the floodplain boundary itself or the zone designation. So this is a slight change to the process, and also you can appeal the regulatory floodway boundary. An appeal must be based on data. You can't just say, well, I haven't flooded here. That's not going to be appeal eligible. Typically, when we get an appeal, it might be that there some other technical data is available. It could be we asked during the discovery, we asked, or even during the work maps, were there any information? But it could be that there's additional technical information that says that the flood maps that we're showing you right now are wrong. So is there a hydraulic model? Somebody did a different detailed study, something like that, and we have to work through the process if that's an appeal or if that's a new study, which would basically be handled through the LOMC, the letter of map correction, letter of map revision, or another process. So there's a number of processes to go through if it's a true update to something that wasn't updated in this map, or if it's a correction or you have additional data that says something on this existing map is wrong. So hopefully that makes sense, is what an appeal is: a formal objection. So the towns can send them in, as well as a property owner. And if you think for any reason your town is going to be filing appeal, please don't wait for the day 89, 90 of the open appeal period. Let us know. We can talk with you. We can work with you. We can help understand what's happening. And it's just, I don't want anybody to miss the date and all of a sudden be like, oh, I missed it by a day. I can't extend that date, but I can make sure we've got everything that's needed to file the appeal. Comments. So if a road name is incorrect, or there's a stream name incorrect, or municipal boundaries changed, or something's wrong with the base map, those are all considered non-technical changes to the map. So it doesn't mean that they're not wrong. It just means we're going to treat them as what's called a comment. So we want your comments now. If you find any, there's no reason to wait for appeal period. So anything you find now over the next 30 days is great, but you can submit additional comments during the 90-day appeal period. But anything that comes in at day 89 may take a little bit longer to incorporate, so it may push back your LFD date a little bit. So it's best to get comments in early, but just to kind of put that in your mind is that anything that's not a technical change to the map is just a comment. The appeal period process. So I've emphasized this. I'm going to emphasize it again. It's a 90-day regulatory period. We cannot extend that. It'll get posted in the newspaper, and you'll have it again. The second newspaper posting, the appeal period starts, and it will end. We cannot extend it or accept stuff after that date. So the individual property owners or community officials can propose the appeal. We're hoping if an individual property owner is going to propose an appeal, they're talking with you, and that you've been able to talk to them, and you can loop us in, and we can kind of understand what's going on. So again, reach out to Scott Olson, the other USGS person that's a project manager. Reach out to myself at USGS. Reach out to Colleen Bailey, who's our project liaison with FEMA Region 1. So let us know that that's coming so that we can work with you and make sure you don't miss the deadline. So summary of map actions, we get questions on these, but these are going to be revised. So these are for your existing letters of map change. So all of the SOMA is going to identify any current letter of map change that's likely to be incorporated, revised in the panel, superseded by new information, or revalidated once the revised panels become effective. That's usually the different categories you're landing in. A revalidation letter lists the previously issued LOMC that has been reaffirmed with the new flood insurance rate map. So there's another slide on this too. So summary of map actions. They're assessing all of the LOMCs, comparing with the new FEMA products. So if you have an existing LOMC and you're looking at that and you're getting a revalidation letter as part of the map process, they're legally binding changes to the map. So what it's saying is that property is not in, and they won't be put in a situation where they're going to need flood insurance. But if for some reason it wasn't approved, that'll be again listed here, and it'll be that it's no longer valid. That typically doesn't happen. For the most part, the only ones, the ones that we routinely see that are rejected or are not incorporated are ones that don't have that lowest adjacent grade, don't have any surveying data that specifically states what the elevation of the house is. If they don't have that information, that's usually older LOMCs, which used to be called LOMAs. That's usually older information. Mostly, I haven't seen any recently. Most of them have a survey, an elevation certificate with them, and we can easily incorporate that whether it's going to be approved or not. And it would be approved if obviously if it shows the elevation is above the floodplain, but it would be included basically saying that there's nothing wrong with the LOMC, but your elevation shows that you're in the floodplain. So again, that's just to give you a summary. There's obviously could be some old things that are unique that we haven't necessarily seen, but we do look through all of those, and that's summarized in that SOMA. Revalidation letter distribution. So I mentioned that there's letters that we're compiling. The community gets it, FEMA regional office gets it, the state NFIP coordinator gets it. They do not get sent to the homeowners or developers. So that's not where they're mailed. So again, the community, you will get a copy, the regional office, FEMA gets a copy, and the National Flood Insurance State Coordinator, Jennifer's office, will get a copy, but the homeowners themselves will not. All that data is available again on the MSC. So homeowners are more than willing and able to go look them up on their own, but they're not going to get a letter. So we covered this a little bit. I'm going to go through it again. The post-preliminary process, the compliance of the map adoption is a 6-month process, and it begins after this LFD, which is also called it's the acronym for the letter of final determination. So that date is set, and then there's 6 months from that point when the town has to do the adoption. So the community officials need to review and revise the community's floodplain ordinance. If it needs to be, it may have been done recently and it might not need updating, but a lot of times if you haven't done one in a number of years, then it's going to need to be updated. In order to avoid being suspended from the program, you must adopt these compliant ordinances. So you must have that updated ordinance. Make sure you're contacting your state coordinator's office, your NFIP coordinator's office. That's really, they're going to be able to help with anything that the states, they can require higher standards or state specific language. FEMA obviously sets the national standard, but the states can have different requirements. So you have to make sure you're talking to your state and incorporating their specific ordinance. Again, they may also know what the age of your ordinance is and if that's still a valid ordinance or if you need to update it. So just make sure that you're updated and approved by that effective date. And again, that effective date is 6 months to the day from the letter of final determination. These are regulatory dates that we can't adjust or move. Just so you understand, there's a legal process and we can't adjust those. So you can't miss those dates. So points of contact, I've talked a little bit about the state NFIP coordinator. So that's Jennifer Gilbert. And then there's a couple other people that work with her on that program in New Hampshire. USGS contacts, you've got Scott Olson and myself. The FEMA Regional Service Center is Alex Siratek. And then for FEMA Region 1, Colleen Bailey is the project manager. Bob DeSonius is insurance specialist, and Jay Niedenbach is a planner. So just so you kind of have some additional contacts. So again, I'm highlighting, email your appeals to Scott Olson, Colleen Bailey, and please include myself. If you need to mail something, FEMA's in the process of moving, so we didn't put their address. We used the USGS's address. So we don't want to get something stuck in the mail, but please email us. Please make sure we know that you're filing an appeal. We'll be searching our mailboxes and all that, but I definitely want to make sure that we know an appeal's coming if there's anything that you may need to be submitting. So who do you contact with questions? So for LOMCs, you can contact the FEMA's Map Information Exchange. That's 1877 FEMA map. They're the people that if you're specifically looking for your LOMC and your status, that's who you call. The Map Service Center, I've highlighted this one a couple of times. It's got everything, basically. Everything is all there. It can take a minute to sort through because there's a lot of information there, but it's all there, all free, all accessible. And then you can learn more about the National Flood Insurance Program again, or you can go to their website and go to Flood Smart. There's a lot of good information there. So you're kind of aware of all the different resources that are out there. Questions. So normally when we did these meetings in person, we would have a breakout session, or we would let people kind of meet after us after this meeting. Sometimes that doesn't allow people enough time to kind of look at the maps or formulate their questions, those sort of things. So what we've done is we've added 2 days that we're trying to make sure that we're available. FEMA has somebody available and the state has somebody available. The idea being that if you ask a question, you may need FEMA to answer it, you may need the state to answer it, and you may need us to answer it depending on what type of question you have. So our idea of trying to set aside these days, so Thursday, June 15th, which is this coming Thursday, 2 days from now, and Wednesday, that's next week, on the 21st. We've set those 2 days aside and asked to try to make sure that there's somebody from the USGS, somebody from FEMA, and somebody from the state available. So if you want to have a more in-depth discussion specifically about part of your map, some questions you have that we can't answer today, we can do that either Thursday or, like I said, next Wednesday. We may be able to set a time outside of those times, but we've set aside those days specifically so that we can meet with you when FEMA and the state are available. We want to make sure that we're going to get them, because again, your questions can vary and we're not going to be able to answer all of your we definitely wouldn't answer ordinance questions. That would be the state and or FEMA. So there's needs for everybody to be on that call. So if you want one of those breakout times, email Catherine Wares with the USGS. Her email's up there. She sent out the letter to you, so her name is on there as well. So if you want, you can if you don't want a breakout, that's fine. You don't need to say anything. But if you want a breakout session, again, just schedule it. So just a reminder to everybody, Catherine's going to check for me and see if we've got everybody signed up. But if you came in late, please go to the chat option. It might look like this. It may look more like this, depending on what version of Teams you're running or whether you're running the web version or the desktop version. Go to the chat, enter your name, the town, agency you represent, your position, your email and phone number, and make sure to hit the little submit arrow. That's something that gets away from people sometimes. So please go in and fill that out if you didn't already. At this time, I'm going to be stopping the recording. I'm going to be stopping the recording.